Hey everyone, my name is Kara.
I'm Juliet, and we are so excited that you are spending today with us. Here at Mountain Springs, we are so passionate about seeing lives transformed across our city and to the nations. And this week, we actually had one of our mission trips get back from Mexico, where they were building homes for families in need. It's truly what fuels everything we do.
And if you're new here, we are so happy that you joined us. One awesome opportunity for you is to download our Mountain Springs Church app. And within that app, you're going to find ways to get connected and to serve, find message notes, anything that you need. So go ahead and download that right now.
You're joining us on a great weekend. Today, we wrap up our series In the Open, but first, let's worship.
No one else You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song, yeah, of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. And I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. And I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. We're yours, Lord. And from my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name, and I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins, and I'm no longer a slave to fear. That's right, 'cause I am a child of God. Declare it. And I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. No longer, and I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. And I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. Jesus, you are worthy of our praise. Victory is in your hand. Victory is in your hand. Oh, we worship you, Jesus. Magnify your name. Singing, oh, 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 you split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. Rescued me. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. Oh, I am a child of God. Oh, yeah. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. Oh, I am a child of God. We're yours. Yes, I am a child of God. Yes, I am a child of God. And I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. And I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. No longer a slave, and I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. One more time, and I'm no longer a slave to fear.
I'm Tom. I'm one of the pastors. I serve on staff here. We've been in a series called In the Open. It's a series on relationships, and this is week 3 of our 3-week series. And as we were looking at this particular one, I started thinking back to 35 years ago. And so, it dates me a little bit, but 35 years ago, I was single. I'd not yet met my wife, and I was attending a church where I had just become a Christian. They offered a class that was a marriage class, and it was just for men. And so it was like a marriage class just for men, and I signed up for it. I thought, this would probably be smart for me to learn some stuff now instead of learning it in year 9 or 10, right? It's not the greatest time to learn that in year 9 or 10. So I was signed up for the class, and I don't really remember a lot of the content from the class, but I do distinctly remember one thing. And as we were talking about this series and this weekend, that came back to me crystal clear. The person that was teaching the class said, towards the end of the class, they said, I can summarize all of the stuff that we've covered by just basically putting it into 2 Bible verses. If you can do these 2 Bible verses and do them well, then you're going to have a great marriage. And I'm like, okay, now we're to the gold. This is the good stuff. This is the stuff I want to write down. So he pulls the Bible out, and he goes to Philippians chapter 2, and I'm going to read the verses for you this morning. He says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. So he reads that and says, just do those 2 verses. Yeah, I can do that. I do so much stuff out of selfishness and conceit. I always think of myself before other people. I'm looking at that going, these 2 verses are impossible, which is basically the point, right? To basically do this perfectly is impossible. So when we started talking about week 3 in the series, and we said we want to focus in on the marriage relationship and talk through that in week 3, we thought it'd be a great idea to invite Tom and Debbie Torkelson up here on stage. They run our Ignite Marriage Ministry, and about a month ago, they had a half-day conference on marriage, and in that conference, they covered 3 things. And if you're following along in your app, these are your first 3 blanks for you to fill out. They covered, first of all, the ideal. The ideal marriage is before you're married. That's all in your head of what it's going to be. And then the second part was the ordeal. That's marriage, okay? That's just what marriage is right there. And then the third part was the new deal. And so it was what does God want to do to make your marriage new? And so we thought it'd be a great idea this morning to have them come and share a little bit of their story and really learn from that story, and then let God really speak into our hearts. So I want to welcome them on stage. Would you guys please give a nice Mountain Springs welcome to Tom and Debbie Torkelson. So week 1 of the series, we talked about when you run. And so I want to start just by asking you a question, Tom. Describe the day that you ran. Describe the day you ran.
Thank you, and I will get there. Before I start, though, I want to say first thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share some of our story. It's just that, it's our story. And so on one level, it's super unique and just ours, but on another level, it's got applicability to a lot of people in the room. And you will see some similarities with yours, I'm sure, if you have a posture to receive. It was an honor to be asked to participate in all this a few weeks ago when they asked, but I also didn't know that it comes with an MSC official speaking shirt as part of the deal. So now that my wardrobe is complete, maybe, we'll get to talk more or something like that. But the series that we've been talking about started with the day we run, and then last week Daniel talked about how we fight, and then I put in parentheses how we fight well. And then today is supposed to be we stay to win. And so as we go through our story, right up front, I play the villain. I'm the villain. Jesus is the hero, and my wife Debbie is the heroine. And so we're going to talk about the day I ran, which is really what not to do. Debbie's going to talk a little bit about how she fought well. And so we get to that point, probably take notes, because that'll save us a lot of time and get your marriages or your other relationships on the right path. But if you endure and you put Jesus at the center and both of you are growing in slow and incremental ways, you win. And so that's where we're going. So to describe the day I ran, I have to give you some backstory of where I came from. And so I grew up Christian. I prayed the sinner's prayer at a summer camp in Italy. I was a military kid right before I was 11 years old. And I remember feeling like I had joined a club. I had made a good, logical choice, but I had no real concept of what claiming Jesus really meant at the time. There's a verse in Romans 6:1 that says something like, now that you're saved, are you going to sin all the more so that grace can abound? I didn't know that verse at the time, but when I learned of it, I'm like, oh, that was me. All I have to do is pray for forgiveness. I can do whatever I want. This is a sweet deal, and I get to live forever. Awesome. But I was a boy. I was a kid. I was raised by a devout Lutheran woman. My mom, she made sure I got to church and got at least a knowledge foundation through confirmation. I memorized the Nicene Creed on the wall out there. But I found out later I had an unbelieving stepfather who raised me. And as I connect the dots of where I started and the journey that was about to transpire, he kind of glamorized and encouraged a lot of the behavior that proved to be destructive in the long run. And so I was introduced to pornography from his dad, my grandpop, just having Playboys in his bathroom of all places. So as a young teen, I discovered those. I grew up in Virginia Beach, which is kind of a party town, and my parents condoned me drinking underage as long as I was responsible. So I started, high school life, young man life, still going to church, but consuming porn and drinking as part of my lifestyle and really my identity. I brought that to the Air Force Academy where I met Debbie. I'm class of 92, True Blue 92, if there's any Academy people here, and she's proud to be 93. And even though it's a hard place to date, it's a hard place to misbehave, I did my best and found a way and continued that kind of lifestyle into our early relationship. We got married probably before I was ready. To stay together in the Air Force at the time, you had to be married. And so a wiser person would have been, you know what, I want to stay with you, but I'm not sure I'm ready for commitment. Now I'm like, let's just get married, because I didn't want really anyone else to have her. I wanted to selfishly have her for myself. The opposite of Tom's verse, I was the most selfish person on the planet at the time. But when we first met, I didn't feel like she was for me because she radiated something different than what I valued. And I used to describe the Academy as a sea of blue misery. And no offense to those of you that are there, but that's the way I was when I was young. And she was different, this radiant smile that cut through all of that. And I'm like, I can't be with a girl like her. I know how I'm living. I know that I'm full of junk and dirt and things I'm ashamed of. There's no way I can and should end up with someone like her. But she saw something in me, and I don't want to take words out of her story that will come later. But we got married. I brought that non-committed posture into our marriage. I was unfaithful to her routinely and all the time as a young man and as a young officer. Continued to stay in porn, continued to drink. But it all comes to a head when my mom gets sick with cancer in 95, and she passes away in 97. We got married in 93. Only 2 years into our marriage, this kind of crisis hits. She fights and survives for 2 years, but passes away in 97. And as I look back, she was really my rock, not Jesus. She was the one that I called with good news and bad news. And when she was taken away, I was really rudderless. And I had a choice right then. I could have leaned into Jesus and remembered what she was about. I watched her witness to people she wouldn't otherwise meet as she was in hospitals and on chemo. She showed me how to die with dignity, but despite all of that, she died. And I blamed God. I rejected prayer, I rejected him, and I dove into alcohol and porn instead of him. And so that starts about a 6.5-year journey of dysfunction and things that I would love to take back. There is regret, there is shame, there is remorse, but it's in the distant past. And I forgot to say up front, there's a really good chance tears will be shed today. If you know me personally, and a lot of you do, it's almost a sure thing. But Debbie is fresh from a trip to Maine where her father just had heart surgery, and she's in a tired and more vulnerable state than normal, so she might as well, even though that's not common. Anyway, where was I in the story? My mother and going off the rails, because I'm about to probably get emotional. A lot of stories like ours, I've heard them, and usually they'll say something like, and I hit rock bottom, and I found Jesus, and I found my way out. I had about 12 rock bottoms. Any one of them could have and should have been a catalyst to help me find my way, but none of them stuck, none of them lasted. But the one that did, for whatever reason, and Jesus gets the glory, was in Las Vegas of all places, and I found myself in a situation that I felt I couldn't get out of. I've probably felt Holy Spirit prompting. I felt like I was surrounded by evil, and he was telling me to run. And so I literally ran away from this pit of evil and managed to get back to where I was staying, woke up remorseful and ashamed, and I went to church. For whatever reason, this was the day I decided to give Jesus another chance. I went to a church not my own. I sat on the back pew, hungover, and not knowing why I was there. The preacher came up to preach, and she said, I had a sermon prepared, but I was up all night with Jesus telling me, Chuck the sermon. I want you to tell the room about your struggles with alcohol because there's somebody that needs to hear it. There it is. And it was such an amazing moment because I felt like God heard me, saw me, and it's the first time I had a little seed of hope that I could get out. And I'd had Christian voices in my life like, leave it at the cross, you got to give it to Jesus. And I heard these things and I knew these things, but I didn't know what that meant. And it really meant you've got to depend on me. And this is your first, or I guess your next fill-in as I cry through it. Dependence brings strength. And I realized through her testimony that I needed to depend on him. I couldn't do it on my own. I couldn't do it with rules and willpower. Those are paths to failure, and I had proven that over the last 6 years. I called Debbie, told her about it. She cried on the phone, said, I've been waiting for this day. And I didn't know at the time, but that 10 January 2004 was my last night with alcohol, but I didn't know that then. It was a very small, incremental journey with hope that was laid in that sermon. Dependence brings strength.
So you started your journey of dependence and started seeing God bring you more strength, but there's like another part of this story. How does the dependence bring strength affect your part of the story, Debbie?
Yeah, so during these early years of marriage and the challenges that Tom expressed that we were experiencing, that was the time that God drew me closer to him. Rather than speaking with other people, sharing with other people, I felt like there was nobody that was a human person here on earth that I could share those things with, but God showed me I could share it all with him and cry to him when I was hurt. I could talk to him, and he showed me through that dependence on him brings strength. It was a daily John 15 abiding in him that brought this supernatural strength to get through that time when I was hurt. And I felt like people weren't seeing me, didn't know what was going on. He brought me that strength.
So Tom alluded to there was more than one rock bottom, that he had 12 of them. I would imagine you probably thought you saw more, but this phone call comes, and he's telling you, from now on, I'm going to be different, kind of thing. What's it like to be on the receiving end of that, and what was going through your mind in that time?
So it was hard, too, to hear the phone call and, again, feel hopeful that maybe this is the time things are going to change. So that started us in our, what I call the cautiously optimistic phase, where leaning into God and him just telling me to trust him. There was never a point at which he told me to leave. I never felt physically unsafe for myself or for my kids during this time, but he was having me depend on him. And when Tom called, it was a daily God giving me the strength to actually offer up trust before I even knew or felt like I could give it myself. That was him supernaturally working through me to say, okay, today's going to be a good day. Today's going to be another good day. And even in forgiveness. And at this point, I would say, too, that forgiveness is a point in time as well as a process that you choose to forgive, and God enables you, gives you that supernatural strength to forgive when you don't feel like you can do it yourself. But it's also a process. It wasn't like all of a sudden I just forgot all of the hurt and forgot the times before, but yet he was carrying me through all of that during that time.
And it wasn't just the two of you, like you weren't alone. You mentioned like kids at that point. So you guys had started having a family. You got 4 kids now. In the middle of that journey, what's it like being a mom and trying to raise kids but protect them from this situation? And how did you handle that?
So again, I think that God provided protection during that time. As I said before, I never felt unsafe myself or for our kids, but yet I still was investing in community with women's Bible studies and going to church, not sharing about what is going on at home, but yet still growing in him. He's still using that time to grow my relationship and my dependence on him to be able to protect the kids and get through this time.
Yeah. So you look back at that day, Tom, and you say that was the day, like, you knew that God was speaking to you and that he saw you and that there was hope. But the thing that I like about your story is that all of us have heard stories where somebody says, so I walked forward, gave my life to Jesus, and I was doing heroin, and then the next day I had no desire for it. And like, there was this immediate change overnight. And I think so many of us hear a story like that and we go, I can't relate. Like, that's not my story. My story is more of a journey. So you started a journey of really submitting regularly to God. And as you were doing that, you were finding more freedom from some of these things. Like, describe that to us.
I will. This starts point 2 in the fill-ins. Submission brings freedom. But before I do that, I want to highlight 2 Peter 1, 1 and 2. Is that right? 2 Peter 3, 1 and 2. Thank you, baby.
People always look at the pastor like I got it memorized.
I know.
Like, you're like, is that right? I'm like, yes. I don't know.
Yeah, it's been a rough morning because every time we tell this story, it's a bit emotional. And so here we are again. But this verse Debbie shared with me later as something that she leaned into during her part that I think is worth sharing. And it's a little controversial because it starts with wives, submit to your husband, and we won't go down that path. But the next part of the verse says basically, through your pure and respectful conduct, your wayward husbands will be won without a word. And that's kind of how she went through our ordeal. She was never in my face saying, you've got a problem, you've got to change, I hate you, you're a horrible husband. None of that. She was pure and respectful in her conduct. And she won me without a word. And if you have an addictive relationship, that's something to read and ponder. I'm not saying that she condoned my behavior. I'm not saying that I was worthy of her respect. Far from it. But she modeled Christ and followed that dutifully to our victory. So, but back to the question, submission brings freedom. Absolutely incremental, absolutely very small baby steps. And for my story, the alcohol was easier to kick than the porn. Alcohol is visible. It changes your behavior. You can smell it. I think that was a motivator to help me get over it better. But I have told people, if I learn there's a meteor coming to wipe out the earth tomorrow, I might have a beer on that last hour of life. It helps me think that it may not be dead forever and all time, but man, I haven't had it for a very long time, and I'm better for it. But porn is private. Porn is in the dark. It's alone. It's more insidious. And after, coming out with a lot of other things, it's hard to drop everything out all at once. And so I think it's normal, but in a human way, to reveal things incrementally. But even spiritually, if you can incrementally submit a little more, it sounds counterintuitive. If I submit, I'm yoking myself, I'm shackling myself, I'm burdened by this Christian living. The opposite is true. The more I submit, the more freedom comes. And it took me in my Lutheran upbringing a long time to give him all of my heart. I would give him a lot of my heart, but porn in particular was the private room that was just for me, that I was reluctant to share, reluctant to give up. And so submission brings freedom. Here are some incremental examples. I remember being in the pews in my Lutheran church thinking, I want to open my hands when I worship. No one else opens their hands. And for years, I would think of it and want to do it and instead cling to the pew or hold my hymnal. And some magical day, I opened my hand. I'm like, oh, this feels different. I remember on a men's retreat, the first time my hand went over my head. And I'm like, people are totally going to see this. It's freeing. I remember in worship hearing from the Lord, why don't you get baptized? I was baptized as an infant, and I felt it would denigrate the Lutheran faith and the good intentions of my mother if I soiled my infant baptism with another one. For years, I resisted it. He goes, why do you resist me? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to submit. And so I got baptized in my 40s in 2014. And these are long, this is a decade of what is really just sanctification. And so if you're in that space where you feel like my list of transgressions is too dark, too black, too dirty, there was a season where I knew I was saved. I knew I was forgiven, but I still felt unclean. I wasn't righteous. Jesus has forgiven our sins, past, present, and future. And I admit there's still a day every now and then where I'm like, oh, but I've done all this junk. And I'm like, I bounce right back. I am redeemed. I'm forgiven. I don't need to carry that around. So if that's you, here I'm that guy. Give it to Jesus. Leave it at the cross. You are forgiven. You are righteous and clean. It is gone. Your sins are cast as far as the east is from the west.
And you just said, Tom, like it was a decade. And so like we're up here for a few minutes and you're talking about decades. You guys got married in 93. This has been a journey. It's like, how long has the journey been?
So we did get married in 93. Tom alluded to 2004 was the time that he had gone to the service when God really spoke to him through the guest chaplain at that base chapel. And then 2014 is really when he started sharing his part of the story. So all during that is kind of our healing, coming out of what really wasn't a great marriage to start with. And that was the time of fighting well. Daniel last week alluded to the ways that you fight well are in prayer with the Lord, through diligence, through obedience, through perseverance. And that's a long time coming out of that. But it really wasn't until here that we started sharing our story together. And that would bring us to the last fill in the blank that we've got for you, that is light is life. And being able to share our story with you all here and with many others to bring all of the parts of our story that aren't so glamorous, that really the enemy can use to keep in the dark and keep you feeling shame. But God wants to bring light into that and redeem it. And when you do that and you fully understand his love for you, then you can extend that love to your spouse, to your kids, to your extended family, to your neighbors, people you work with. It's when you fully understand how much he loves you, how much he's forgiven you, that you can extend that to others in the light-bringing life. And also, you don't find a good marriage, you don't find a good friendship, you don't find a good community group, you build it, and you do that with Jesus as the architect. He's the one that makes that, enables that to happen.
That's good.
Yeah, I would say big segments of the journey. Daniel last Sunday talked about Lance Witt's book, Your One Life, and he said, we don't get a do-over. And I think he meant that in the sense that we have finite minutes on this earth and we need to use them for God's glory. I totally agree with that. But when I first heard that we don't get a do-over, I felt like we kind of did in our marriage. I felt like we did get a do-over. I can't change the past, but I can redeem the future with Jesus' partnership, with Jesus' help, his power in my life. That's a choice. And like Debbie said, not till we got to Mountain Springs about 5 years ago did we feel like we should be public with our story. We raised our hands for the beginning of the Ignite Marriage Ministry, and I saw at least Eve Johnson over there before we started. There they are. And Rex and Eve Johnson are really who I give credit to training many couples who raised their hand during that season to give us confidence and encouragement just to step out. We don't have it all squared away. We don't have sage pearls of wisdom that are going to heal your marriage tomorrow, but we're willing to walk alongside you. And if you're at that season, like I said, 10 years of sanctification, 10 years of healing and growth before I felt like I could come public, a few more years for Debbie to share her side of it. It's a season. But Revelation says we win by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony. There comes a point where I think you should share. And if you're feeling like it's time, we would love to meet with you after the service and see if Ignite is something that you can step into and help watch other lives be transformed by this powerful hero we call Jesus.
Well, I'm sure in a room this size, there's got to be some people, individuals, or couples that are sitting there thinking, I'm done. Like, I'm just done. I love your story, but I don't have anything left in me to fight. Would you have any, like, final words that you'd want to share, Debbie, and then Tom, to people like that?
We know that anything is possible with Jesus. He is the one that really enabled this miracle of our marriage and where we are now and the redemption that happened. We know with him bringing strength and life and freedom that anything is possible. Don't give up hope. And if you feel like you're giving up hope, come shed it into the light for somebody else to be able to walk alongside and say, we've got hope for you, to be able to pray into that.
Yeah, I would try to speak to the person who has all of the long list of junk and transgressions. I gave you the PG version today. There's an R version and an X-rated version. And if we compared transgressions, there's some of you thinking, it can't be as bad as me. I doubt it. I'm pretty sure if we want to compare, that's not a godly and biblical thing to do anyway, but I probably got you beat. And I would just say, take a very small step. My very small step was going to church that day, and you all have already done that by the nature of being here. But I know there's people that are struggling with porn, that are struggling with something, maybe many things. And John 8:12 comes to mind where Jesus is talking, and he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. That's real life. And the world would tell you nightlife is life. That's not life. And you might tell yourself for that for too long. But if you make a move towards him, as small as opening your hand in worship, as small as believing that his promises are for you, they are. He promises a life abundant. He promises a life of freedom. We choose to wear the chains. We give the enemy power with disbelief. Just believe and take a step, and you will win.
Amen.
It's a promise.
I told you in another service not to cry up here, because when you cry, I cry, and then Debbie's the only one that's holding us together. So I want to speak to a couple groups here today. Like, if you're sitting there today and you have gone through a divorce and you're hearing this message of like, stick it out, stay in there and everything, and you didn't, there could be a message that you might be hearing right now that's a message of shame. And I just want to be very, very clear that that message is not from God. Amen. It's not from Tom and Debbie. It's not from Mountain Springs Church, but there is an enemy that would like to shame you and condemn you and is going to try to do that. So if you're hearing that, I just want you to know it's not from the Lord, okay? There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And I'm so thankful for these guys. I got to meet them 5 years ago when I joined staff in 2018, so I got to meet the more redeemed version of them and just love them so much. Could you just thank them for being so willing to share their story?
Thank you guys so much for joining us today and jumping into this series with us. Next week, we're going to be starting the Gospel of John, and we're going to be camping out here until the end of August. So I just want to encourage you to read ahead and really dig into what the Lord is saying through this next series.
We love you guys. We hope you have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next time.